to be autonomous. And
in that case, then, if it depends on that kind of thing, what moral responsibility does anybody have for their decisions about anything?
all right, that's an outstanding question, and so I'll address that and I'll pass the mic over. What I'm questioning is the ability of what is framed as the principle of autonomy, and that a patient's autonomy can override the physician, the patient's autonomy can override the government, etc. All right? I'm suggesting that the way it's laid out, that's an illusion. So you can certainly commit suicide, and then no one's going to stop you from doing that, but to empower a physician to kill you is a different story. If you do that, will you actually have that autonomy, or will they basically look at your situation and say, you don't have a life that's worth living, so we'll terminate, and persuade you to do that? I guess so what's the moral issue there? The moral issue would be this. Should we empower, is that moral to empower someone to indeed to take that responsibility or take that caveat out of the hand of an individual? Can you even trust it? And I guess I go around to this, is that humanity, and this is the point that I think ought to be attacked, actually. Humanity is radically wounded, and that we can't trust ourselves even to make the right decision. So is there a moral responsibility? It depends on the stories that you adhere to where the contours of that responsibility would be in the stories. In my story, I don't have the wisdom to make the decision, and therefore to make a decision in my life would be immoral for me. Not necessarily for you, but it would be immoral for me and in my community.
I believe that we do have autonomy and are therefore morally responsible for whatever we do.
Question right there.
This question would be directed to either member, but was originally aimed at the theological perspective. I'm asking whether speaking from a theological or political perspective, with consideration of a separation of church and state, what grounds does the government have in deciding that a self-chosen death is moral or immoral?
That's the issue of competing moral vision. And so what I would suggest at this point in time, a government is grounded in a particular moral vision. In the United States of America, that moral vision was a Judeo-Christian moral vision. It's shifted over in the 1990s, and I would suggest that's no longer the situation. So what the government creates and makes rules relative to the worldview that they're articulating, that they believe or they hold to. So what right do they have to do it? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Granted the separation of church and state, what right do they have to use a religious moral scheme to legislate?
Separation of church and state, my sense was a separation, and so that no state could not demand how one worshiped. That was my notion of separation of church and state, not the separation of worldview of what one held and what one laid as a basis to articulate the policies and procedures, laws of the land. So there is some kind of bottom line right. So if you take a look at how the Constitution is laid out, Bill of Rights, I would say early on, as it has some Judeo-Christian flavor, I would suggest that at this point in time that there's a shift in that as well as there's a shift in the medical ethic. And so the experiment is on, we'll see where it goes.
I more or less tried to address this in my comments about that it's my view that I have no grounds for requiring a person who holds to Judeo-Christian beliefs to submit to euthanasia, nor does a person have a right to prohibit me on the basis of their own moral beliefs for exactly the same reasons. And the First Amendment is not only prohibits the establishment, but it also prohibits us from denying people the right to practice their own religion.
Okay, we'll go on to another one.
Okay, I do, may I have just one follow-up on that? If you look at conscientious objection, in the state of Washington, and it's more enlightened in Oregon, but in Washington, there is right now legal action pending that a pharmacist must dispense emergency contraceptives. All right? And basically, even though the pharmacist in that case said, I'll refer to another place, they're denied their ability to express their particular religious value, which is a deeply held conscientious objection. So I'm not sure the laws can protect when there's a new, different worldview in place.
Yes, Lady of the Green.
How would each of you view a person foregoing medical treatment in order to die of an otherwise treatable condition?
I would look at the intents for which they're doing that. So what, can you give me a concrete example give me a concrete example or fill it in a little bit? Maybe Dr. Roberts could answer without a concrete example.
Too abstract. You're right.
Suppose somebody had breast cancer that was probably treatable, but she decides that she doesn't want to undergo breast cancer treatment for a variety of reasons, personal, financial, burdensome. How would each of you view that situation and then she would die of breast cancer?
I would want to know how old this person was. For example, we don't treat, physicians that, to my knowledge, do not treat prostate cancer in certain aged men because of how long it takes to develop, and they will likely drive old age first.
The physician would recommend treatment, you know.
But that, okay, but I'm saying I would want to know how old this person was. I would want to know if she would have a particular religious belief that God gave her the disease and therefore she should die from it. I mean, there are people who have these belief systems. And so I would want to know all those details before I could answer.
Dr. Wernow.
I concur with that context, with her statement, as well as I would like to know if there's an underlying depression. I would like to see if that was part of the situation. And there is no mandate that one can demand to be treated. I mean, we can't force treatment upon someone. So right there for me, after addressing, is there depression? What is the rationale? And looking at the context, if those things line up, I don't see any reason that an individual, we can force a treatment upon anyone.
Yes, sir, in the green.
A question for Dr. Roberts. In terms of the autonomy you were talking about, say someone decides then that for all the reasons you talked about, palliative, narcotics, whatnot, start entering your system, change your mind, but can't communicate it. Doesn't the process actually then subvert, undermine your own autonomy?
I actually don't think people make these decisions rashly. My sister had 5 weeks, for example, to think about this. My father had 79 years. I mean, or I'll say 5 years. So I don't think, save underlying depression and suicidal ideation, I don't think these decisions are made in any way that they change their mind when the process has begun. Any more than I would ask, probably turn around and ask the question, let's say that I'm diving into the Nicey River to save a child who appears to be drowning, and I've already dove off the cliff, and I changed my mind. Too bad. I mean, basically, that's what it boils down to.
Okay, next question. Yes, sir, in the white.
What is your position on euthanasia for those who do not have control of, are unable to communicate, or are not presumed in a position to make the decision without?
Who are you asking?
For either.
Well, we both will like more information. I mean, it's too, you can't answer questions like these in the abstract. They never arise in the abstract except in textbooks. It's always someone's life.
So if a person is in a coma in which the current medical knowledge they will never come out of it again. Is it acceptable for them to die, for the physician to hasten their death, or should they just let the person carry on in their coma until the natural process?
Are you thinking in terms of Terry Schiavo, for example?
Yeah, or just any person who is entirely unable to communicate a wish in the world.
If they're not suffering and suffering and pain and agony or whatever, I don't know why, I personally would not. And I don't know the person, or even if I knew the person, I wouldn't hurry their death along myself.
So I guess that comes down to what your idea of suffering is.
I think that we generally understand what suffering is. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement about that.
Okay. Dr. Wernow, would you like to address the question?
I'm a little more confused about exactly what gradation of suffering is. For me, suffering is a bit more subjective to your question. It comes to a notion of is the individual, who's driving the termination of that individual's life, and what's the ethic that's based on? And for me, in all cases, it's probably is it like what's useful is good? Is it an inconvenience? Is there a political game being played? In almost all cases, in that case, which is an involuntary euthanasia, my stance would be no.
Could I ask, are you thinking of the person who is conscious but can't, the people who are conscious but disconnected from ability to communicate, and they may be suffering because they're trapped in a conscious body? I mean, to me, that is the nightmare.
Yes, they're trapped in a conscious body, but then unable to express anything.
And how would you know that?
Usually brain scans can determine if someone is conscious or not.
But how would you determine if they're suffering with a brain scan?
You cannot really determine if they're suffering or not. But I would think at least that there would be intense suffering in a person who is consciously trapped within their own mind but unable to do anything with their body.
Don't you have to be ultra careful not to project your own fears and anxieties onto someone else in a case like that?
Oh, yes, definitely.
I wouldn't do it.
All right.
Okay.
This
Next
guy's had his
question.
hand up from the very beginning.
Yes, sir, in black.
All right, this is for both doctors here.
By the way, neither of us are medical doctors.
Okay, well,
We just play one on TV.
Well, you look, yeah, you look. Anyway, you both said pretty adamantly, Dr. Roberts, was it?
Yes, me? That's
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
even more so, that as far as drawing the line and picking the point where you say, okay, now it's the suffering's gone on long enough, let's end it. And you've said over and over again, both of you, that no one has that wisdom. And in your story of Job, you said that, Job, his self-righteousness was his problem. He thought that he could decide for himself what was righteous and what was not. And you also quoted from the Proverbs that the heart is evil above all else. That, when you're dealing with something that's absolute, such as physical death, who in the world has the wisdom to make that decision absolutely besides God?
And that's where I think there is a conflict in moral vision. From my moral vision, from the stories that I structure that particular choice, I could not make that choice. But, well, I won't put words in Dr. Roberts'